the actual first episode of Who Stayed Over My podcast. Your co-host, Neil Strebig, joined by Donald Double D DeCray. This podcast, yeah, it's going to be another kind of nerd culture show, but I will probably go over some hot topics in the show, cover a couple nerd culture, movies, comic books, video games, pretty much the whole 9 yards. And we'll probably have a couple offensive jokes thrown in there as well. So, if you got a couple tissues ready, it might be worth your while. But, if we do offend you, we apologize. But try not to be over the top with dissecting nerd culture. It's really just two friends here. I've known Double D for, Christ, what is it, 12 years now?
God, has it really been that long? I know there's gray in my hair
Maybe
these
it's longer
days.
than that.
Oh.
But I mean, honestly, like our fandom for video games really, I think, is what kind of bonded us too.
Yeah.
It's one of those things where I think so many, and I mean, I was a jock too when you met me. I mean, guess you could still say still am. So complete polar opposites. You're
Yeah,
definitely
such a Chad.
bookworm,
What a dick.
super stereotypical nerd kind of thing, and I was, kind of afraid of my nerdom in some capacities. You kind of kept it
Really?
under tabs. Yeah, I mean, especially in high school.
Well,
It
that's
was still
fair.
very
I mean,
much 1980s, jocks versus nerds. It was social suicide.
I mean,
If
I
you came
kept my
out too
my
much of a nerd.
nerdiness under wraps. Everyone knew I was a nerd, but I didn't walk around talking about that, right? Like you meet someone, you're not like, "Hey, like, what's the last anime you watched?" It wasn't a thing in high school. Or, "Oh, you want to play Yu-Gi-Oh with me?" Because I did play that back then, and wasn't a good conversation starter. Not those days, at least.
No, I didn't ever get into Yu-Gi-Oh. It was always Pokemon cards. But
Oh, I did them all: Pokemon, Magic, Yu-Gi-Oh. We ran the gamut.
Jesus.
Hey, man.
But no, with this show, I mean, the focus is again. I mean, nerdom. It's a passion, and more than ever, it's a part of pop culture, especially the MCU, DC universe, even Star Wars coming into it as well. But it's still one of those things to where it's a bonding kind of moment, like any sort of culture and any sort of art, really. So, I mean, I think what we're gonna do is just have fun with it and break down the show.
Yeah, and
Shoot.
I do want to get in later on how you just sort of slid Star Wars coming into it as though that wasn't like a very nerdy, very like classic thing in nerd culture for longer than the MCU was a thing.
True.
Just kind of like, oh yeah, like that thing exists too. But we'll deal with that some other time.
I think every generation has their Star Wars now, but no, basically,
It's an
I
interesting
run down
idea.
the show. We're gonna start with something Double D coined the Spectator Mode, essentially similar to PTI's the rundown. We give a couple current event kind of topics or trending topics in our community, and we'll kind of do a couple hot takes with it, and then basically bounce off there. Whatever the theme of the show. I mean, this week we're talking about MCU, what we love, what we don't like, and
Where
the
the hell's it
winners.
going?
Yeah, yes, and the winners and losers. And how many movies they have total now? Like 55.
Oh God, I'm actually not sure. That's a good question to ask.
But I mean, no, let's kind of just jump into it. So, Double D, take us through spectator mode and get us started.
All right, boo. We'll have hopefully graphics and music or some kind of little thing to punch up here. So the basic format here is we're gonna go a minute giving our impressions on whatever it is we're talking about, and frankly, you probably don't know what it is we're talking about, and we'll just see how that goes. So we'll get started. Minute to win it. Going now. So the first thing is the guys over at GameHistory.org released a very interesting article. Do you remember the classic game NBA Jam? Imagine you do. And they found that there was in development a Major League Baseball Jam. It was called Power Up Baseball. It was something that was in development for a while and just never ended up being released. So other than a few dev versions that were trialed, it never was seen by the public, and they found a working version of the game, which I gotta say, I'm personally thrilled if I can get my hands on to try that out a little bit.
I mean, NBA Jam it was awesome. It was an old school arcade game too, man. I remember actually having to play it next to the old Terminator arcade. And also, it was the only time my Timberwolves were actually a viable team to pick. So,
I mean, I really think they kind of opened up the world of what EA Sports became today, though. Like NBA Jam was the sort of quintessential sports video game of a generation.
I mean, the arcade game is like that. I mean, think about NFL Blitz. I mean, it was super popular as well. So you take a sports game, make it arcadey, a lot of fun. And again, I mean, the whole heating up and he's on fire, it still transcends all the sports, and it still basically becomes a common term for anybody in sports as far as
That's true.
really
And that's all
kicking
the time
ass,
we've got
taking
on that.
names.
So moving on, Cyberpunk had a disastrous launch filled with bugs to the point that it's been pulled from stores in several cases. And CD Projekt Red has been reeling from the community backlash. A lot of people are complaining about the fact that they said they were releasing it for PlayStation 4 and Xbox One. Then they had to move into new generation consoles because delays, and PCs turned out to not run on the old games at all. Seems like it was a game that they made it for PCs, then tried to cut down to make it work with the old generations. In that vein, Halo Infinite's coming out pretty soon, and they recently released a dev update talking about how they're optimizing. And another game, Biomutant, which was announced in 2017, supposed to launch in 2019, has just kind of disappeared for the last 4 years because the same issue of optimizing across 3 generations and multiple consoles. And I gotta say, I don't know that it's fair that we expect games to run on old consoles. I'm just gonna be honest.
I mean, as a guy that basically just bought a PS4 this year, I mean, I'm happy for it because I can actually still play some of these games. But to your point, though, yeah, if a game takes, and I think everyone is in agreement with Cyberpunk. I don't think anybody would have cared if we had to wait another year and it would have been what we expected. So if that means, yes, making it for a single generation, absolutely. You being a PC guy, you guys are a bit luckier. I mean, Cyberpunk being the exception, but I think most games too, if they're a bit buggy, PC can still run them just fine.
I mean, and to be fair, Cyberpunk does run better on PC than any of the other consoles that you can get it on at the moment.
Yeah, but I mean, I think it comes down to take the time, make the game what it is. I mean, nerds, we bitch and moan about stuff, but at the end of the day, we want a good product. So if it takes an extra 2 years, I mean, fuck them, you know?
I mean, and I'll be honest, I'm willing to say, like, we're in that awkward transitional phase between generations, and I know game companies don't want to miss out on backwards compatibility and the money they can make with that, but I really think you optimize for one platform. That's what you go with. That's what it is. And you know what? Some people are going to miss out, and that sucks. And you're going to miss up maybe some dollars on that. But again, what you said, a good experience is more important, I think, in the long run than just having something exist. Moving on from there, over Christmas, we had the release of Wonder Woman 1984. It was previously ranked second by Nielsen, who ranks TV shows. And
I didn't rank them.
Oh, you didn't rank 1984 at all?
No.
No, well, to be fair, it wasn't really well received by critics or audience members. It only scores a 60% critic rating and a 74% audience rating on Rotten Tomatoes. But HBO Max came back to Nielsen and said, yo, wait, we got something over here. Look at our numbers. And apparently it was viewed 14.9 million times over Christmas, making it by far the top show of the holiday season. And I gotta say, this quote really tickles me pink from Andy Forssell, GM of HBO Max, said in a statement, as announced on Wednesday during our earnings, and as this Nielsen data shows, Wonder Woman 1984 was a huge holiday gift to the consumer at a time when they wanted and needed it, which I think is just the height of conceit.
I mean, I think that's kind of fair, though. I think everybody watched Wonder Woman because it was a brand new movie. It wasn't something that you're kind of on the fence for. And all those streaming platforms, I think we all go through the half an hour of what movie do we want to watch, what catches our eye. But to the point with the 49 million views, I think it's amazing because there's an old David Spade interview. Sorry. There's a David Spade interview with LA Times, and he makes note that, yeah, he makes some crappy movies and whatnot on Netflix, but it's worldwide. All those movies do 500 times better than Tommy Boy and any of his classics. And even Joe Dirt, I mean, the recirculation for that is basically how it became a cult following just on cable TV on Comedy Central. So you think about just that exposure, you're going to have a lot more eyes on it. You're going to have a lot more people that might enjoy it. But yeah, Wonder Woman 84.
That's my issue with it, though, from the get-go, is like these numbers seem good. And here they are saying, like, we've made a gift to consumers and stuff. And it really seems like they're really hot on their own shit. Doesn't stink, right? And at the same time, you have a captive audience. We're in the middle of a pandemic. A lot of people aren't going out or weren't able to go out over Christmas. You want to find something that's going to be multi-generational that everyone can appreciate. And Wonder Woman seems to fit that niche in terms of being a comic book show, or a comic book movie rather. People tend to think that goes for kids, but the MCU, as we've seen, appeals largely to adults. A lot of adults enjoy those movies. This is a DC movie. So I think people were using this as a compromise pick of like, hey, what can the fam and everybody watch and get down and enjoy? I don't know that makes it a good movie. It just seems like they exploited a situation to their benefit. And I guess to a certain extent, that's business and that's what it means. You know what I mean? To make money. At the same time, a gift to the consumer, a holiday gift to the consumer. I mean, shut the fuck up. All right. And that does it for me. Kicking it over to you.
I mean, I think we got to start with everybody's favorite topic right now: the GameStop
Oh,
GME
God.
short selling stocks. Basically, subreddit got involved with a hedge fund that was doing a short sell, which is very common in Wall Street. You basically buy stocks at a fixed price, and then essentially you expect the price to drop so you make a quick profit. What the subreddit did then was start buying GME GameStop stock and driving the price up. So this hedge fund was basically taking massive losses on their stocks. Right now, we saw Robinhood and other third-party apps like Robinhood and E-Trade stop you from buying any additional GameStop stock to basically save these said hedge funds. Quite frankly, I think it's one, hilarious, and two, I mean, it's a free market, and these subredditors, for better or worse, did exactly what hedge funds and pretty much everybody on Wall Street has been doing for years. We saw in 2008 with the housing crisis, the same exact thing, short selling, and these guys are essentially upset because their own tricks got pulled on them.
Oh yeah, I mean the thing with the whole situation in my mind is ridiculous because the way you make money on short selling, right, is most of these stocks the hedge fund itself did not own. It's akin to like renting an apartment. They don't own it, but they have use of it free so that they can do what they want with it, and they pay the owner a certain amount of fees plus a potential of whatever profit they may make off of it. So they get these stocks that they're basically renting, they're borrowing, sell them at a high price, flood the market as well. So the price was already going down. They flood the market though, which now you've got an excess of supply. Price drops even further. They buy them back for less than it cost them to sell in the first place. So then there's a price difference. They sold it higher, bought it low, and now they have a profit margin on a stock that was losing value. And this is literally creating money out of nothing. Like in theory, if you just did what people normally do with stocks and sat on it, you'd be losing money on GameStop right now. And the fact that Reddit caught on to what was going on and just snapped all these shares up before they were able to buy it back, to me is hilarious. Like
Reddit controls the internet. Reddit controls the stock market now. I think that's the moral of the story.
I just love the way that they're talking about it as collusion, as some kind of thing of it, and like maybe it is, but like it really isn't any different in my mind than what goes on typically behind the scenes in hedge funds and on Wall Street. You know what I mean?
No, it's the same old tricks. I mean, I think we have to dedicate a whole episode to this once the topic is, concludes, because who knows what's going to happen. It's still going
Someday
on.
it's gonna sell.
But I mean, moving on to some lighter news, though, at least. Resident Evil Village, the seventh game in the franchise. Everyone loves the big lady, busty, big body vampire lady in the game. Reddit and Twitter went off as far as, falling in love with the Resident Evil Village lady. So, Double D, yes or no? Would you?
Ah, man, I don't know if I'm the guy to ask about this, and this might come out with a little bit of my personal proclivities, but I gotta say, she looks basically about as bad as my girlfriend after she messes up her makeup. So yeah, I could handle that. She absolutely is gonna love hearing that, I'm sure.
I mean, the whole hands thing kind of creeps me out because I'm worried about a reach around or something with those claw hands. But I'm a sucker for busty ladies, so I'm in. I'm like, fuck it, why not? See where this weirdness goes.
I mean, it's one way to get people into the franchise, I guess. Resident Evil's been around for a long time, and adding some sexual spice to it is definitely a new take.
Without the over sexualization, though, I am actually interested in buying this one because it does remind me a bit more of BioShock. And I'm not a big horror genre game guy, but I do like the vibe with this one, with the vampires and a bit of the Transylvania kind of hotel vibe to it as well.
I gotta say, they've been crushing it with their updates too, in terms of not just like graphic updates, but they've made everything look good, run well on new gen consoles and PC with the Resident Evil franchise. And I think really they've been setting the standard for what an update or a remake should be.
WandaVision, MCU's latest, well, actually, no, first of their, I guess, phase 4 shows on Disney Plus.
Yeah.
Much different kind of vibe to it. Takes place. We know Vision is, dead after the Infinity War and Endgame. Spoiler alert: movie's been out for 3 years now. So if you haven't seen it, that's on you. But no, it takes place with them basically in suburbia, and it goes through different eras of television, 1950s, 1960s, 1970s, and how they're basically trying to form a family in the suburbia that we're unsure of if it's, alternate universe, if it's real, whatnot. Very peculiar, kind of strange show, but just came out. I'm not caught up. I haven't watched the 4th episode, which came out on Thursday at midnight. I'm enjoying it. I feel like it's a show that you might want to wait until it's all the way out and binge it all the way through, or watch 2 or 3 at a time. It's definitely a lot different. I don't think it warrants any sort of the heat it's getting right now because it is just different. It's a slower pace. We're not quite sure what's going on. But again, I think if you watch them in chunks rather than episodic each week, you might have a different take on it.
Well, then this will be interesting because you are watching it sort of as it's coming out. I haven't started watching it yet because my plan is to binge it more as a movie experience rather than a show experience. And maybe that's a mistake on my part. The thing that I think for me is interesting is like Fahey has confirmed that Wanda in the show is aware of Vision's death. Like she knows he died. And despite that, we've got all this stuff going on. And I mean, we're going to get into this a little bit later anyway, but with the upcoming slate of Marvel movies looking at potentially alternate timelines or alternate universes, I really think this is going to set up a lot of that potential going into the Doctor Strange Multiverse of Madness movie and what we've been hearing about the Spider-Man 3 movie as well. I don't know if I actually like that direction, though, for the cinematic universe, if I'm being honest.
Well, we're on the topic with the MCU then. I mean, what do you expect from Phase 4 and what do you want to see from it then, man?
All right, so I mean, let's transfer over to that, right? So Phase 4 is coming out, and we've got a slate of movies. Everything kicked off with the WandaVision series, which was the first one to drop. We've got Falcon and Winter Soldier coming, Black Widow, and Loki are all going to be shows. But the first movie we get is going to be Shang-Chi and the Legend of the Ten Rings, followed by The Eternals, Spider-Man 3, and then Doctor Strange and the Multiverse of Madness. And I think we can already see a lot of the pieces that they're looking to use for the next Phase 4 and Phase 5. Spider-Man 3, we've got a lot of confirmed characters from other Spider-Man movies coming in, which might even be like a practical thing, frankly, because of the issues that we've seen with Spider-Man and the IP not being owned by Marvel, by Disney. They're sort of creating an opportunity maybe to give themselves freedom with how they use that character by moving into, the Miles Morales Spider-Verse side of things, essentially.
Well, I mean, it's a Miles Morales story.
Yeah, but with Peter Parker, which is its own issue in my mind, right?
No, I love Spider-Man, and easily my favorite character, Marvel DC. I like Tom Holland as Spider-Man Peter Parker.
Yeah.
I fucking hate those movies. I can't stand it.
Why?
I love the casting. I love Michael Keaton. I liked what's his name, Jake Gyllenhaal as Mysterio.
Yeah.
It's a Miles Morales storyline, and I can't get past that. Like everything about it is so fundamentally flawed with what Peter Parker is with Spider-Man, and it pisses me off too.
I mean, I feel like that's too harsh. At least
it fits
in
with
the
some
two
of the things,
that we've seen.
It irks me because they're not bad movies. Maybe I'm being a bit harsh, but like, all right, spoiler alert with the end of Far From Home. It is so anti Spider-Man, Peter Parker, Spider-Man. It drives me crazy. It's a fundamental part of Peter Parker and why he is the best hero in either Marvel or DC. He's always torn between his Peter Parker life and his superhero life. All his villains blend into both. It's very difficult for him to find any sort of peace. Superman doesn't have to be Superman. He can just be Clark Kent. No one's going to know any difference. Or he can just be Superman, shoot off of Earth, not give two fucks. Batman doesn't actually have to be Batman. He feels compelled to, and yes, he's a sociopath. But ultimately, he could just be Bruce Wayne and just bang biddies and, be a billionaire playboy all day.
But I get where you're going with the thrust of it, that, like, for Spider-Man, his villains are both his personal villains in his Peter Parker life and his villains in his Spider-Man life, and that presents its own unique conflict for the character that we don't generally get to see.
And what bothers me with the MCU with this and why I'm kind of harping on it is a Disney effect. I mean, they could have put Miles Morales in Civil War. They kind of rushed it to bring Spider-Man in, and it was cool. And yes, anyone that read Civil War comic, he's an important part of it. Civil War movie, we really didn't fucking need him in there, straight up. I was happy to see him, but with how he actually was portrayed then in the movie, we didn't really actually need Spider-Man in there as hype as they were compared to his role in the comic.
Yeah, because he didn't serve the same role. And for those who might not be aware, in the comics, Spider-Man was crucial because he ended up switching sides partway through the storyline. Started off, I think, on the side of registration with the government, and before things were concluded, was against the law in the end and switched sides. And Spider-Man has understood typically to be we the readers are the Spider-Man character. We're supposed to be siding with Spider-Man in the beginning, then as things sort of unfold and we get more of an understanding of what's really going on behind the scenes and the impact this law will have, when Spider-Man changes allegiances, it's expected that the reader is, that's like the reader insert, right? Like that's the character who's supposed to be experiencing things from our perspective. So a very crucial character in the comic version of the Civil War storyline.
Well, I mean, again, his identity is his most prized possession. So in Civil War comic, when he finally rips off the mask, I think it's the end of the fourth book, and he's like, "Hey, I'm Peter Parker." You're blown away because his entire existence, Peter Parker always tried to make sure no one knew he was Spider-Man. The only ones that knew were, basically Mary Jane and Aunt May in a certain capacities later on in the storyline. But he
Did
always
Gwen
always
know? Gwen
protected.
knew in the comics, right?
Gwen did, yeah, as well. And I mean, honestly, we can do a whole Gwen versus Mary Jane episode down the
No,
road
we don't.
because
We
Gwen,
can't because we both agree. Gwen Stacy all the way.
she was ride or die. Mary Jane was jealous of Spider-Man. Like, you have a superhero
God.
boyfriend. She's just like, "Ugh, where's my time?" Ooh, like,
Yeah,
fucking
we
trash,
can't do an episode
man.
on this
Trash.
because on this we agree too much. We're both Gwen Stacy. It's not a question.
But either way, like in Civil War, it was impactful because you're like, holy shit, Peter Parker just was like, hey, this is who I am. And again, because of that dichotomy with his life as Peter Parker and his superhero life and not being able to escape from it, it puts a massive target on his back in his universe. So the MCU with this laissez-faire, and yeah, he's a bit nerdy with Holland. Andrew Garfield, I felt like his Peter Parker was a bit too cool, like the Spider-Man. It just fits way more Miles Morales and also this. And I saw it a lot in the Avengers game, and I don't really like this component of the MCU. And maybe it's just because, again, growing up with reading the comic books and the source material a bit more, and folks introduce themselves to MCU, this fanboy, fangirl kind of nonsense. And that's what I get with Holland's Spider-Man irks me. And I say Avengers video game because Miss Marvel in that is complete fangirl. It takes away from the game half the time. She's just happy to see the Avengers. And it's like, even young heroes like Spider-Man, like, they knew when to buck up. They weren't like, oh my God, like Iron Man. You have some tropes and whatnot as well, but they were superheroes. And then it's like, yeah, they weren't starstruck by these guys. And I think that really just irks me from maybe just a traditionalist standpoint.
I mean, and so this is going to be an interesting thing just to give some background in terms of where we come from and how we see this. You grew up, I think, reading the comics. Like that was your first exposure to most of these.
Well, I mean, I couldn't read. I just looked at the photos, and then like my brother's just like, "Oh yeah, that's a conjunction." I was like, "Ooh, that's cool."
Conjunction function.
Yeah.
Conjunction junction. What's your function? But no. So that gives you a certain perspective, and I think influences the way you see the characters. Because my first experience with comic characters was actually through video games, right? Like Ultimate Alliance and stuff like that. Like that's where I really first got exposed to it. I knew about them, but they weren't like mainstream in my life until the Cinematic Universe, where then that's what kicked me over to comics after the movies got
A lot of those
bigger.
games are still very source material and comic driven, though.
Yeah.
So you still had a lot more identity of like who these guys were and where they're coming from and their roots.
Yeah, and so I'll agree in that sense, but I guess what I'm saying is like I don't in my head think of, for example, Spider-Man as being super nerdy. You know what I mean? Like you see him in the games as his Spider-Man persona, and there is that distinction. Peter Parker is this more reserved, quieter, smarter guy, where when he's Spider-Man, there's a certain sense of freedom. He gets very quippy, with the comebacks and stuff, and just sort of a confidence that he doesn't have in his day-to-day life. Like again, that sort of like difference between wearing the mask and the anonymity that it provides and what it's like to just be him in his own skin. And so, like, in that regard, I mean, maybe Tobey Maguire is, Raimi memes aside, like, maybe that is, like, sort of like what Peter Parker was really meant to be, because he was smart on his own. He was quiet. We did see him failing with the girl. There wasn't that smoothness, and when we saw, like, The Amazing Spider-Man, like, dude was smooth with Gwen Stacy, man. He's sliding in there. He's, like, right up in her DMs, no problem. Like, that's the personality I think is associated with him in the costume, not just him, going about. And maybe my gripe with Andrew Garfield's portrayal, not that it was his fault per se, but his version of it. And Tom Holland now has to distinguish himself from the previous Spider-Mans. And I kind of agree with you in the sense that I think the way they did that was to basically make him Miles Morales. And the question that should be asked a little bit is, why didn't they just make him Miles Morales? Like, what was
That
wrong
that's my
with
point with
that
the Disney in a lot
inclusion?
of ways. It's like they're so afraid then to marginalize some of their fan base, but it's like no one would have got mad at you for having, a black or Hispanic character, boom, in the Civil War. And
Oh
I felt like
no.
they were, I think, and this is what pisses me off with
I
Disney a
mean, think
bit.
about
I
the reception
think
for
they're
Black
still,
Panther. Fucking T'Challa,
yeah,
man.
I think they're still afraid to marginalize some of their audience, and everyone kind of portrays them as like, oh yeah, like look at them, so progressive, and it's like they were scared shitless. They didn't. They were afraid to have a Spider-Man movie with the black or Hispanic lead. Straight up, that's my take on it. Because then you look at Zenyatta and then not Zen, I'm mispronouncing her name.
Zendaya.
Yeah, sorry. I was
It's
playing
okay.
Overwatch
It's okay.
yesterday, yeah. But and then whatchamacallit, his best friend as well. So yes, you have a minority kind of cast, but this is what Disney does. Like then they put side characters as minorities, and it's like, look at how progressive we are. We kind of saw the same thing in Star Wars, not to kind of split ship, but it's watered down bullshit, and it drives me crazy because it's like it's half-ass progressive, and everyone's just like, oh yeah, like we got something. Look at big screen, and they just want to be happy. And it's like y'all could have went all
Yeah.
in and had a much greater impactful effect. Why the hell didn't you? And quite frankly, not that my opinion matters much as far as what Disney's trying to do to make money, but if you're gonna do a Miles Morales storyline, make it fucking Miles Morales.
Yeah. Make it Miles Morales. And so it comes back to, there were studies done in terms of what roles people of color, Latinos, African Americans were getting in the movie industry, right? And very often they were side characters. If they were leading characters, it was in comedic roles and stuff. And this idea of like, they're not being taken seriously, they're not being given starring roles. And like overwhelmingly, the numbers favored that, right? And I don't know that the Marvel movies have really gotten away from that, because we see a lot of inclusion in side characters. Black Panther is Black Panther, and that's awesome, but that's kind of the only one like it. Like none of the other characters have anything else going on. And why not? You know what I mean? Like, and that comes back to, again, like Spider-Man, you have Miles Morales, who, especially after like the Spider-Verse animated movie, Into the Spider-Verse,
Amazing.
I mean, it was a phenomenal movie all on its own, but I think it also showed that like people can get behind a Spider-Man besides Peter Parker. You know what I mean? Like no one was
Yeah.
complaining that it was a Miles Morales movie, as
Mhm.
it should have been, completely his storyline, and that's true to the source material. But like it also shows that you don't need Peter Parker as Spider-Man to make a Spider-Man character work. You know, and it's also my
Exactly.
gripe kind of with Ms. Marvel, frankly. I
I'm glad you brought that
despise
up
her.
because I would say exactly where I wanted to go with this is like Miss and like Black Panther, great movie. 8 out of 10 as far as an origins film. I know a lot of people will like 10 out of 10 kind of thing. No origins film's a 10 out of 10. Like that's just doesn't work. If you have a 10 out of 10
No,
origins film, you want to leave them hanging, you want them something more.
and
But
if we're being fully honest and like aware of our position, the impact Black Panther had on us white dudes is not the same as it had for other people
absolutely.
in the theater watching that for the first time and seeing a black superhero on screen, being badass, being awesome. Like that's just a fact, you know. And so I
Yeah.
don't detract from anyone who would put it as a 10 out of 10 because of its own significance, which is considerable.
No, for sure. I agree with that. I agree with that. I'm getting a bit critical in the sense of you waste two of his best villains with Killmonger and oh my gosh, the Claw.
Yeah.
Ulysses Claw. But that's my biggest gripe with that. And then Killmonger wasn't believable in some aspects. But I digress. Miss Marvel, to your point. Again, I like when I saw Miss Marvel in theaters, when it started off with the fight scene between her and Jude Law, I was like, this might be the best Marvel movie yet. Like I was hyped. The fight scene was fluid. I was like, all right, man, this is like I'm in. This is dope. And then it just went down this girl power getting kind of force fed just retro nonsense. Even the soundtrack. I'm not against the soundtrack being all female lead bands, but even the timing of like "Don't Go Chasing Waterfalls" by TLC and Basie and Overview Segway Long Drive. It's like, why did you just do that and to throw it in there? And I felt like it was just rushed, and they wanted just to push like, look, we have a female lead. She's a badass, omnipotent in a lot of regards, but there wasn't really any development. I didn't understand why. Like the
Well,
story they presented, there was no reason for Miss Marvel to either want to fight for humanity or even just fight for the core. Like there wasn't. It was just like you have
and she ultimately
superpowers
she
and
didn't, right? Like let's be clear, she fucked off at the end of the movie. She was out in the galaxy fighting the Kree and uh wasn't around on Earth until the events of Endgame. Like she really didn't stick around or fight for humanity at all.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, and you could argue maybe in some larger sense the Kree posed a threat that she was doing, but like, you know, none of the other villains the Avengers fought were worth her time or whatever the fuck. And then you get the girl moment in Endgames of like, let's carry the MacGuffin to the end line, right? Like, we've got the gauntlet, we've got to get it there, like da. And all the other women characters, female characters show up, right? And she doesn't need them. You know what I mean? Like, she's so strong on her own that she literally could have just like picked it up and gone to the finish line on her own. So they're over there like taking shots and fighting and completely trivialized by her power level, which is another issue I have with her character. She's so insanely strong. How do you pose a threat to her? And then someone like our new Captain America Falcon, like, I can't imagine it. I can't imagine there being a threat that they would both be relevant against because her power level is so off the charts compared to every other person that we've got right now in the MCU.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. I mean, Scarlet Witch was standing, but to your point with Endgame and the girl power scene, all for that scene being in there, not against it. What pisses me off and like what drives me crazy with the Miles Morales component with Spider-Man, the lack of an actual good plot to feel compelled to believe in Miss Marvel and be 100% behind her, it's this watered down progressive. Like, why don't make a 30-second fight scene out of that? You just did a trailer shot of all the female characters and a segue shot of basically them coming in to basically throw like 2 or 3 punches. Give us a full 5-minute fight scene with all the chicks kicking ass. Like, just go in just a little bit more. Just don't give just a trailer shot. Like, just dive in a little bit past surface level. That's all I'm asking for the MCU. But like, Van I'm viewed as an asshole because everyone's just like, oh, you just can't be happy. And it's just like, comic books again.
No,
like,
it's virtue signaling. It's phoning it in virtue signaling, right? Like, it's like we have this moment to have this moment and say we did it, but it's not really doing it. It's not giving it the credit it deserves, and not really, you know, giving them maybe the space might be the way to phrase it, to show off their strengths, show off their abilities, and you know, and be women too. I'm so tired of the like, I'm a strong woman, which means that I'm sort of butch and I buzz my hair and stuff, and it's like, we can't just be feminine and strong and like, not that those types of characters shouldn't exist at all. I just think it's gotten to the point of being a trope that being a strong woman equates roughly to being masculine in a lot of ways, where, you know, you don't have men running around playing up like any effeminate traits or stuff like that. Like, they're just dudes doing things, and it's completely an aside to the character. You know what I mean? And it's just, how do you signal a girl had a big change in her personality or in her motivations or goals? You cut her hair. Like, and you know what I mean? And then we go with the short haircut. It's more practical. It's more, you know, like dudes wear short hair. It really, to me, is phoning it in. It's all phoning this in when you have opportunity to expand these characters and you don't, you know, and it's the same thing with Miles Morales, same thing with what I think they did with their moment in Endgame and what they're doing with Ms. Marvel, who I really don't want to appear in the rest of MC. I'd be happy if she was gone. I'm sorry. I'd be happy. Nothing against Brie Larson or the character in general. I just don't like the way she's been introduced to the cinematic universe, and I don't like her relative power level. I just don't think there's a good way to handle that character, which is probably why they had her fuck off for all the other movies until the very last moment.
Yeah, no, I'm with you, because again, there's no, from her origins film, there's no reason for me to believe that she has any desire to fight in any capacity. She's just omnipotent in a lot of ways, and she just kind of exists. And that movie could have gave us at least a reason for her to be like, yeah, I need to discover myself. Like, I'm going to fight for humanity for, you know, X, Y, and Z. We don't. She's just kind of like, I'm stuck with these powers. I guess I'm just going to fly around and blow up ships when they're in my way. And it's like, okay, and we should all just be happy because there's a strong female character on screen, strong because her powers are. But again, no actual substance behind the character development. And to your point, without the villain, and villains make the heroes, killing the Skrulls like they did in that movie, it leaves us wanting quite a bit. At least I know I'm left wanting with that character.
Well, and so there are the theories floating around that Nick Fury is a Skrull, that he didn't survive everything or what have you, and that some Skrulls have been shapeshifted into him post that whole encounter. So the Skrulls might still be around. That'd be cool. We also know we're getting the Internals movie that is releasing, which means we're probably getting an Inhuman storyline as well. I'm pretty sure actually we're getting. Let me double check.
I'm not big on the Inhumans either, straight up.
Really?
Yeah. What's his name? Can't talk because of his crazy voice powers. What the hell's his name?
Can't talk because of his voice powers?
Yeah, he's basically the leader. Black
Oh,
Bolt.
yeah.
Irks me because it's like, all right, so you're the leader of basically intergalactic version of the X-Men, essentially.
Yeah.
And I mean, I do like the Inhuman component of like, metahumans as DC and how they're weaving that in. That is cool, just to explain how people get supernatural abilities.
Mm-hmm.
But how the hell can you be a leader of a group and you can't fucking talk? Like, you just writing down a note to Medusa and being like,
Well,
hey, we should attack these people.
this is
Like,
not
so
a
fucking
cinematic
stupid.
universe issue, but this is an issue. I think. Yeah. Okay. Okay. I mean, Etch a Sketch works too. Personally, I'm a big fan of it. Reusable, good for the
Yeah, yeah.
environment. Well, and
Jesus.
so I was dissatisfied with the movie depiction of Thanos. Like, I think they went too far to make him gray, like morally gray, and didn't just let him be vile, like in the comics. And it's not even that he's an evil character in the comics, right? Like, his comic motivation is to please death. He's obsessed with death, and he thinks that by
Well,
killing all these people, he'll get her favor, he'll get her attention, and she
yeah.
doesn't care. So he's called the Mad Titan because he's pretty much just insane. You know what I mean? And I think they went to great lengths to make him this gray, like half the the universe. You snap it away, da da da, and it's like doesn't really solve anything, does it? Because everything's gonna, it's just gonna repopulate and everything else. And importantly, if that's really your motivation, it depends how close you were to overpopulation in the first place. If you were one step away from it, going back to half, and then it doubles again a short time later, you're back to it. You know what I mean? Like, you know what I mean? If you take oh, give me a second while I pull up these numbers because those play into this argument really well.
Now, I mean, I don't know. I didn't mind, as you're pulling those up, I didn't mind the MCU version of Thanos. But to your point, yeah, he's a bitch in the comics, straight up. Thanos is a bitch in the comics. Lady Death is their harbinger of doom, so to speak. Racer X reference, anybody there? But but no, I mean, Lady Death is really the reason why he gets Infinity Gauntlet and is, supposed to be this omnipotent presence of evil. But she's the one really pulling the strings and the one you should really worry about. Yeah, he's strong and whatnot, but in the comics, he's kind of just a chump, and he gets played up a bit more as far as this mad tight and super badass. Because yes, his power spectrum is pretty broad, and he can do a lot of damage. But in
Oh
actual
yeah.
action, he's kind of a bitch. But the
Well,
MCU, I did like the MCU version of him. I
and
think it
part of
did
the
give
thing
him a
though,
lot
I
of
think
humanity.
the the thing I think I do like about Thanos as a villain, both in the comics and in the cinematic universe, is like while he is very strong on his own, you know what I mean? Like tossed Loki around like a rag doll and everything else. His power was enhanced by the stones. So to me, it made him a believable threat. You know what I mean? Like he's got this army, he's very strong and everything else, but at the same time, like he doesn't rise to the level of like a universe threat until he acquires all the stones. And what I'm concerned with is how do you top that, right? Like if Thanos was your
Mm.
villain, how do you go bigger? And then you start thinking things like Galactus. We're looking now at alternate timelines and stuff. And like, I'm afraid of them basically blowing their load in an attempt to one up themselves, that the next villain has to be bigger, more impactful. And how do you get bigger than like the universe being half the universe being at threat? So just really fast, I found the numbers that I was looking for. Estimations on world population on Earth, right? So for the entire existence of humans, to reach the first billion humans on Earth was probably around the year 1804, give or take a little bit, right? Then 123
Why don't you just
years.
say 1804?
1804. 1804. Fine, whatever. We can go with.
1804, you
I
weirdo.
feel like
Christ.
that's the way, the cool kids say things. I don't know. But then it takes another 123 years. So we're literally talking thousands and thousands of years to get the first billion. Next billion is 123 years, 1927. That next billion, so to get to 3 billion people, 33 years in 1960. Obviously, each billion you add ends up going less and less because technology, because of people, because exponential growth, blah, blah, blah. But the point is, if you cut us in half and from where we are today, you're basically going from where Earth is estimated to hit 10 billion people in the year like 2050, give or take. And if you go down to 5 billion people, that's 1987.
Hmm.
It's my lifetime. So like if you think 2050 and then you were to rewind the clock to, I was born 1989, you rewind the clock to when we were born, that's all the time he bought us by getting rid of half the people on Earth, which really isn't much considering. So like, and I know it's probably not meant to have this level of thought put behind it, but just having the number of beings in the universe isn't an effective solution to the issue which he's talking about with the overpopulation and not enough space for life and everything else. So I don't know. That's what I'm saying. Like, for me, his motivations fell flat. It just didn't work because you have this like basically omnipotent being. Once he gets the Infinity Stones, he can do anything. He can make the universe larger. He can create more resources. He can do any kind of thing he wants to do to solve this problem. His solution is to snap his fingers, cut population in half, and buy us another 70 years.
I mean, it's an interesting argument when you go back to 87 like that, to be honest with you. It isn't really scaling you too bad. But the counter argument is, he cut half the universe population. But I mean, yeah, honestly, probably brings us back to like 2000 then, when you consider that fact.
And that's kind of the issue that I have with it, right? Like, the math doesn't support that as a realistic solution. If everything else is the same, it doesn't really help as much as it might seem on first glance. And so it's just one of those things. I don't like it. So with that said, we've touched on this a little bit, and I would love to get your thoughts. What would you say are your worst, 2, 3 Marvel Cinematic movies, the ones you did not like at all?
Miss Marvel is definitely up there. Again, it left me wanting with the character. I know some people probably be like, oh, like I'm being a hater or misogynistic because I'm not just supporting a strong female character, but there was a lot there to want more of. I wanted to see the reason why she wanted to fight, had a lot of potential, and I love the soundtrack. I love all the bands on there. I mean, Veruca Salt, I never thought I'd see actually in a motion picture soundtrack past the year of 1999. But again, the placement, the pacing of the movie, the plot, it was just trash. It just was a dumpster fire. Could have been a lot better. Thor is up there, but I will say the butt with Thor, it was in a time of superhero movies that were still a bit campy, choppy. Iron Man's really the only exception to that rule.
Crazy to think Thor released 10 years ago now.
Yeah.
It celebrates its 10-year anniversary in May. So yeah, like 9.5 years ago is when it actually released.
Yeah. But I mean, it was during that time to where the X-Men trilogy, it was cool and everything else. You go back to it, doesn't really stand the test of time. Sam Raimi's Spider-Man trilogy, Spider-Man 3 was standing. Spider-Man 1 and 2 were good, but again, exceptions. When Iron Man was phenomenal film. I think that's in most people's probably top 10 MCU wise. But again, exception at that time. So, but Thor was just a bad, and I'm not a big Thor fan. I don't like the Asgardians. I don't really care for Norse mythology. Because again, I'm with you. Like, I don't like the omnipotent,
Yeah. So we had this conversation a little bit before in terms of the Norse gods specifically are just insanely strong. Like, any random Asgardian is strong to begin with. And then the gods themselves, Thor, Odin, they're just a whole other level. It's ridiculous.
And they're kind of assholes the whole time. Like, at least Zeus was jealous of mortals. That's what it created, some sort of tragedy in there and some sort of tension. But as far as the third kind of movie, I do hate MCU wise. It has to be, again, the first Spider-Man with Tom Holland. Because yes, and again, it's.
Now, are you talking Homecoming, or are you talking not Civil War? That was his first appearance, but Homecoming as his first standalone movie.
Homecoming and Far From Home, they are good movies. They are, and they're entertaining. And I'm not knocking anybody that enjoys them. I did really like the first ending after the Mysterio fight with Far From Home, and where that leaves him with the dichotomy of the villains basically exposing, like, hey, we're coming after you kind of thing. But it's the Miles Morales storyline. And when I left Homecoming, and I love Peter Parker, like it irked me to no end to see Peter Parker be done like that. And that's what drove me crazy. I never thought I'd leave a theater being like, that Spider-Man movie kind of sucked. And I love the Amazing Spider-Man movies and what they did with the Gwen Stacy storyline. And I like Michael Keaton. I like what they're going to do with the Sinister Six. It's just, again, it should have just been Miles Morales. That's my biggest beef. And yeah, it kind of hangs me up when I watch these movies. Yeah, no, absolutely.
I'm sorry. We've been saying Ms. Marvel. I guess it's technically Captain Marvel. Ms. Marvel being a slightly different character.
Yeah.
My mistake. I was.
We're gonna get just trolled big time on.
I know if we ever share this on anyone now, it's gonna be everywhere how we fuck this up for most of the conversation. For me, my least favorite movie is Captain Marvel. I agree with you. We've talked about this before. I just don't like the way they handle the character. And I think part of my issue with it maybe was it was a throwback origin movie when we've gotten to establish characters, right? I understand your dislike for Spider-Man Homecoming, and especially we agree in terms of the Miles Morales instead of the Peter Parker should have been that character. But I like that they didn't bother giving us another Spider-Man origin movie. They just dove into a character we know, we love. We've seen him before several times, like picked up and moved on. Let's get down to business. You know what I mean? And like phase 1 had those intro movies, Iron Man, Hulk, Thor, Captain America, Bing Bang Boom, right? And Iron Man, great. I think it was a phenomenal kickoff to everything. Back in Black in that movie just got me so hype. Thor was mediocre. I don't know if it really hit the same note for me per se, but like we quickly move on from that. Thor did not pick up in Dark World. I think Dark World has to be my number 2 movie that I dislike. It wasn't a strong entry into the franchise to begin with, and then I don't know that Dark World was better. And the thing that maybe is upsetting about that for me most of all is like it was very clearly based around an Infinity Stone, right? And that's kind of I think where we had a clear sense of what threat we were looking at, what we were facing. Because in the Avengers, we didn't realize we were looking at in the Infinity Stones and stuff at that moment, even though they were present in the storyline. Dark World is very clearly like, hey, Infinity Stones, this is what's up. And otherwise, it's such a bland movie. It's just such a shame.
I haven't gone back to rewatch it straight up, but
oh man. So I mean, I guess the thing by the time we got Captain Marvel, I was over origin stories, and we had just had Doctor Strange, we had just had Black Panther in the same phase, and then we have Captain Marvel, and so we've got our new players for the next phase 4 stuff that we're looking at. We're assuming those are going to be the main players, but it's another origin movie, it's another character, and I just don't think it was handled well. So 1 and 2 right there, and I think if I had to pick a third one that I disliked, Age of Ultron. I'm gonna be honest.
Age of Ultron is pretty bad, all things considered. That is a good call. Yeah.
It's just one of those things. Like I think it shouldn't. Like I don't know if people are gonna agree with me or not on this one. Like I'm afraid to say it in the sense of like it's an Avengers movie, and typically the Avengers movies are well thought of and received. But at the same time, of the Avengers movie, by far, I think it's the weakest entry. And I feel like there was a lot more they could have done with the story than maybe they did. So it's one of those movies that like I could take it or leave it, and maybe ranking it as like on my bottom 3 isn't fair in that regard, but at the same time, considering it's supposed to be one of the major, staple movies with all the headliners in it and everything else, the fact that it's just kind of like meh to me, I think counts against it. You know what I mean? And bumps it down to my bottom 3.
No, I'm with you. I mean, seeing Ultron in a fighter jet pissed me off to no end. Like that's the dumbest scene of maybe in all of movies, all of cinema.
You did not like having Transformers in Marvel?
So yeah, you have the most powerful AI of all time in a fighter jet because he wants to be human. Like no, like Ultron never is like that. He's just like, yeah, I'm an AI. I'm going to kill you using like your technology. He would have been on the ground punching Iron Man in the face, controlling the fighter jet, killing Quicksilver. That's what would have fucking happened. Like that drove me just bonkers. And I mean, another one too, to your point with Ultron too. Iron Man 3, a lot of potential. Did not hit that potential at all. And I do like Iron Man 2. I know I'm in the minority there. I like the casting. I like the pacing of Iron Man 2. I love Sam Rockwell as what's his name? Hammer.
Mm-hmm.
But Iron Man 3, yeah, if they would have just did alcoholic Tony Stark and not fucked up the Mandarin, who again we might see him now with
10 Rings.
Exactly, which will be cool, but the Mandarin is one of the coolest villains strictly because you're talking Iron Man technology versus magic. And it's honestly a trope we don't really see too often, especially in kind of Marvel or DC.
No,
even though
right.
DC really, I mean, magic's kind of the trump card all over the place, even though we don't necessarily get too many characters that get to showcase it. But
I mean, what's Superman weak to? Kryptonite, which is science, and then magic.
Exactly. But no, I mean, the Mandarins is cool because, again, you have one of the smartest human beings on the planet with Tony Stark. And then just old school magic kicks his ass, and he's really got no answer for it. Because there's no scientific answer around magic. It is the X factor to all of it.
Well, because I think this is one of the things I told my girlfriend when we first got into the movies, because she wasn't a comic book person or Marvel movie person until we started dating. And I was kind of explaining what I consider the unwritten rules of comics, and the idea that like, you have science characters, you have magic characters, and like they're very distinct, and kind of whatever the hero is the world they live in. So like Spider-Man's villains are science characters. They all dabble in science. They all get messed up in some fashion, and similar to how he did. And I, it's kind of meant to create that foil of like, this happened to Peter Parker or Miles Morales, and they chose to do good with it. This happens to other people. They do bad with it. Science characters, science villains. And the same thing on the flip side, you have magic characters, magic villains, which brings me to maybe the next part of this is like what we're looking forward to in phase 4. Sorry, before we jump into that, we might want to talk about briefly. It might sound to someone listening to us right now that we really don't like the Marvel movies because we've been very critical about them.
We have, yeah.
Without really going into what we might like about them. So I will throw this out here, and I hope we come back to it, is we are finally going to be getting Doctor Doom, it looks like. There looks like a Fantastic Four movie on the horizon. Doctor Doom is one of the best villains, I think, of all time. Blends magic and science, which I think is part of what makes him so interesting and just a good villain in almost any scenario, because he's relevant in basically all scenarios. You know what I mean?
He sacrifices love basically for ultimate power. It gets like him and the Joker to me are 1A, 1B as far as best villains all time. Because yeah, the Joker's a homicidal maniac. He has no rhyme or reason for what he does. He just wants to see the world burn. Dr. Doom just wants to fucking win, and he's fucking good at it. Bottom line, you know what I mean? And like the fact that you have a guy that's like, yeah, I could live like a happy ever after, normal kind of life, and like, maybe be a bit Machiavelli, or I could be like the baddest man in the universe. Yeah, I'm gonna be the baddest man in the fucking universe, and just like punches Reed in the face. Reed Richards in the face,
Yeah.
and it's just like, just hold my beer. Like he is the quintessential villain, and again, he builds his own country.
Well, so I look forward to his introduction to the Marvel Universe. I think the Fantastic Four movie is slated around 2023 at the moment.
Yeah.
Delays and pandemic and all notwithstanding. So we'll see what it actually comes out as. But all that said, before we get too far into the phase 4 plans and beyond, why do you think the Marvel movies have become the success that they have? Because we've seen superhero movies for a long time. Ages, there was Spawn, like they're talking about, Deadpool's the first R-rated movie. Good. Spawn was in there, Blade was R, like
Howard the Duck was Marvel's first movie, actually. No, a lot of people forget that Howard the Duck.
I didn't realize they did Howard the Duck movie. I know the character. I didn't realize
Marvel's
he had a movie.
very first cinematic movie, way back in the day. And if you ever read Marvel Now, great book by Sean Ho, it dives into basically how Marvel is what it is today. Doesn't necessarily paint Stan Lee in a great picture. And I think I always joke he's the grandfather, adopted grandfather for so many fans. But anyone that's familiar with the comic books and Jack Kirby, it really dives in their relationship and how much Kirby created this current universe we have. And Stan Lee essentially just wanted to make movies. He always just wanted to be kind of Hollywood and take these comic books to movies. So the whole pitch where we're at right now, the MCU, was Stan Lee's pitch back in, the end of the 70s, basically. It was
really?
Always
was
his
it that
goal.
long ago he had this kind of concept? He had this vision?
Yeah. And I mean, you think about the 70s of TV shows and everything else, it was really what he was always trying to do. For better or for worse. I think though now with technology and CGI, like the movies are better. And Marvel, even as shitty as the X-Men movies were in some capacity, don't really, stand the test of time. Marvel does a phenomenal job as casting. I don't think anybody's going to knock any of the roles and actors and actresses they pick for these. They do a great job in that regard. Even as much as I've shit on Spider-Man with Tom Holland, like Holland's a good Spider-Man, good Peter Parker.
Yeah, it's not the actor that's the issue. It's the fact they chose Peter Parker as the character, which isn't an actor thing. Yeah, I agree with you in that regard.
But I'm excited to see where they go with it. I think the allure right now for it is similar to, and we talked about Star Wars being in your show. Sci-fi, and if you believe in sci-fi and fantasy and you're drawn to that, there's a certain element that just hooks you, and it hooks your imagination and it pulls you in. So if I was a 10-year-old kid seeing these movies, yeah, like one, they're visually pleasing for sure, but they are all moral based. They are all hero tales and good versus evil and good triumphing over evil and the tension. It's a cool entry thing, no doubt. Yes, they may not be exactly what I would like to see. They're not completely based in the comic books and the complete source material, but it introduces a whole new generation of fans to comic books, and to the point to where, how our friendship kind of started, to the same shit that we got kind of made fun of or kept inside. We were like, holy shit, you're into that too? Like, fuck yeah. People are starting to see that. Now, yes, there's some people that still are kind of ignorant to just, I'm an MCU fan, not going to read the comic books. But whatever, the fact they're enjoying comic books and seeing these characters for as awesome and beloved as we've always known they were, that's a cool thing. Yeah, it may not
Yeah.
always be what we want to see, but I think that's really why MCU has had success, and the movies have only gotten better with time, in large part thanks to one, the casting and the technology.
I mean, I agree with everything you said there, but I think for me, there's something simple about the superhero formula that I think is a compelling tale. It's why we see it so often. But I think what the Marvel Cinematic Universe did is they were able to break through the restrictions on the type of movie you can have. And so I'm going to repeat secondhand information I got. I had a film major roommate in college. Dude still does film related work to this
George
day.
Lucas, yeah.
Yeah. But he talked about how like there's this idea basically that you can have an action movie or you can have a drama story driven movie. And so you can have a drama story movie with action scenes in it, but like the action doesn't carry it, it's the story. Or vice versa. Like the Transformers are action movies. There's story there. Not that it's not important at all, but like you're there for the action scenes, right? Like that's what carries the movie. And if you try to do both, it typically just ends up falling flat because you can't get enough of a compelling story with enough action to really be able to do both effectively. You got to commit. And I think what Marvel did by doing this multi-movie thing is they allowed themselves to be able to do both in an effective way. They sort of broke out of that mold because the origin stories are much more drama driven. Yes, there's the action sequences, but it's about the characters, it's about the story in those origin movies. And then by the time you get to the Avengers, it is an action movie. It is high octane, it is fighting, it is going, but we have an emotional attachment to the characters from those story movies we got before them. And by having this multi-movie series, they're able to sort of switch between those two modes. They can switch to story mode and get us connected to the characters, get us connected to the world and the universe and everything else that we see going on screen, and then switch back over to action to give us that adrenaline rush. So like when you get to Endgame, which is much more of an action movie in terms of the suspense and everything's ratcheted up to an 11, or even Infinity Wars, right? Building up to the snap. You can do that because you've got us invested emotionally in other movies. You didn't have to do it in that movie. So you can just focus on ratcheting up our nerves and getting to the snap at the end and just ripping everything out and making that an emotional moment for us. And I really think that's where they succeeded is being able to break out of, I think, the established way that stories are told on screen. Now, with that said, I'm going to use this to sort of segue into what's coming up. Because while I think they did a really good job of breaking out of existing storytelling rules for movies before, I'm afraid they're going to get really messy in phase 4 and beyond, to the point that it's going to become diluted and fall flat. And the reason I say that is the first 3 phases had a clear end goal of Infinity Wars. They knew where they were going. The movies were dictated. They had 4 main characters. There was some side stuff around, but like really you only had to know the 4 and you were good. Mm-hmm. We're now moving into where we have the main characters aren't disappearing entirely. They're moving into shows or other things. Thor's still getting movies. We're looking at Multiverse of Madness coming up, which is getting into parallel universes along with the Spider-Man stuff that it looks like we're getting in with the recasting of characters. So now you're pulling in, are those movies now canon as well in the cinematic universe? I think it was it Fahey as well who kind of made this comment that he views everything as canon to some extent. So like holiday specials and stuff like that are still to some extent canon, even if they're not officially part of the franchise. And this almost seems like an attempt to bring all of that in. Also recognizing the fact that Disney has now acquired a lot more of these IPs. You know what I mean? Like there was an Immortal storyline teased in Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. because they didn't have X-Men. So they looked at what's the next best thing we can use to substitute for the X-Men for mutants in these storylines that we might want to do. The Immortals were the next thing. They're their own thing, but most people aren't aware of them, and they're not, importantly, mutants. So they're allowed to use those. That obviously got scrapped because now they have X-Men to play with. And so it feels like I can't tell what's going on. I'm nervous that they're going to get really big with the story. I'm nervous that they're going to get too many characters. It's just going to get too dense. It's going to be too heavy for viewers to enjoy and keep up with everything that's going on and to keep that emotional connection. I think they built so well in the first 3 phases.
No, it's a good thing to be concerned about. I think we might see some stuff we like more on Disney Plus in that regard. To how much we don't know how much that's necessarily going to connect. I understand that
But a
WandaVision's setting
better
up a lot
focus for
for
sure.
Phase 4, but again, to your point, the execution and the build-up, you did have those storylines and you felt invested with the characters. And even if you're Scorsese and you hate superhero movies, Infinity War and Endgame was, you know, cinema history. Now, we're
Yeah.
never going to see something like that ever again, only replicated. And you can't knock that at all. Yeah, you may not like them, and yes, they're action heavily focused for sure. It may not be drama masterpieces or Oscar winners, but the fact you had, 24 films leading up to one cinematic moment is entertainment, and that's exactly why we go see the movies, and it's what we love about these stuff. But with Phase 4, I'm with you. The multiverse does concern me because I'm always been a big fan of you kill off a character, they stay dead. Villains make the hero, and again, when characters die off, it adds depth to both heroes and villains. Why a
Mhm.
villain decides to kill off a character and how a hero responds to that. Because a lot of heroes, and we see this a bit more in DC than Marvel per se, just because
Yeah,
Marvel
I'm
dips
thinking the
with a
Killing
lot
Joke
of,
off the top of my head.
yeah, but I mean, Marvel dips with a lot of fantasy and science fiction, but they're right the borderline. The only reason they're not villains and anarchists is because they may not kill. So again, when they're pushed to the limit, then and you're pushed to somebody like Thanos then too, to where ultimately they did have to kill him to get rid of him. How do you respond and come back as a hero? And the multiverse, I don't. It's entertaining from a comic book perspective because you expect people to come back. From a cinema universe, though, it kind of falls in the tropes of TV shows, and why I've kind of gotten away from watching Arrow and The Flash. Characters don't die. It's fucking annoying.
Yeah,
I get invested. I'm like, oh my god, that's crazy. You got me
there's no
hooked. And then two
consequence.
episodes lack. Yeah, exactly. And it's just like, is that we're going to see that? And I bring up Disney Plus because maybe we might see characters stay dead in the shows rather than the movies, or we might see them die off in the shows and brought back in the movies, vice versa. But to your point, yeah, it does create something that I'm like, it may not be as entertaining. And if they're going to keep going
Yeah.
down the tropes that we've talked about with Miss Marvel and the Miles Morales,
Captain Marvel, Captain.
yeah, sorry, Captain Marvel, and watering down, progressive nonsense, that's going to bother me too. So,
Yeah. Well, I'm also concerned too with how much I'm afraid the TV universe is going to play in to the cinematic universe. Like, at least in the first 3 phases, there were TV shows, right? Like Netflix had its own the Defender series, right? It had Luke Cage, Daredevil,
it was
uh
great. It was great
Iron
stuff.
Fist, and Jessica Jones, right?
Yeah.
Very good, very good. Completely apart. And it was still part of the cinematic universe in the sense that they recognized the events that happened in the cinematic universe. They talked about those events, they talked about those characters, but you didn't need to see the movies to appreciate the shows, and vice versa. You didn't need to know anything going on in the shows to appreciate what was happening in the movies. They were still like distinct IPs, even though they were set within the same universe. Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. was a little more impactful. I think there was a little more crossover between those, although I don't think it ever got the attention it deserved. Some of it seems like it'll be it seems like there's a distinct shift, right? So where these shows were apart and sort of self-contained in the universe, but not necessary to understand the overarching story and plot lines, WandaVision seems like it's going to be setting things up in terms of alternate realities and stuff with, if you know the Scarlet Witch character from the comics, was a mutant, first of all. In the movies, she was obviously created as a result of an experiment. Again, they couldn't use mutants because of Fox owning the IP. And her powers weren't telekinesis. Her powers were really reality alteration. And in the comics, there's a similar storyline to what we're seeing now with Vision, where she loses her son, which causes her to basically imagine a reality with no mutants. And because of her powers being what they are, this, for a moment, becomes reality. All mutants everywhere are just no longer mutants. They lose all their powers. It's not a thing, et cetera, et cetera. So it sounds like, it seems like WandaVision is setting up this reality divergence thing that's going to go on.
I do have hopes though with Doctor Strange and the multiverse of madness kind of thing, because I've never been a big Doctor Strange fan because again, I'm not a huge fan of omnipotent characters, and his realm of powers is pretty damn broad. He essentially, you could make our case he's the most powerful character in all of Marvel universe. But
The
if they're going to
Sorcerer
go the
Supreme.
multiverse aspect, I think it will be exciting to see it through that lens and what they do. And I do like the casting there, but it all comes back to, again, how much tension is going to be left, how many characters are going to stay dead, and what iterations are we going to see? Are we going to see a Peter Parker version I want to see? Or are they going to make Miles Morales basically like Peter Parker, since they've taken Miles Morales' storyline, which again just comes back to the starting point of why didn't you just do it in the first place?
Well, and I want the character deaths to matter, so I would be more accepting of passing on the title, passing on the shield kind of deal with what happened with Falcon, because I want to see him struggle with that, with the legacy left by the original Captain America, with not being a super soldier, for example, and just being like a regular dude with a shield, basically. And I want, so in that way, sort of the death still matters, even though the character lives on in some fashion, the name lives on at least, the death still is of consequence. It matters. And I'm kind of afraid of what you're talking about, that like they'll pull in characters from the multiverse where these deaths just didn't happen, or the character didn't exist at all. Like you could easily imagine a scenario where I think, Bucky, who is Winter Soldier in the cinematic universe, was for a time Captain America in an alternate storyline. Captain America didn't die. Bucky became Captain America. He was the one who was selected for the program, whatever. And it's like, what is this adding to the story if we get a character like that who's just coming in and it's just an alternate version of the Captain America we got with Steve Rogers? We get the Bucky Captain America. You know what I mean? It's like, I don't like that, because it's like, if you wanted to tell that story, tell that story. Like you could have gone with, again, like you could have gone with Miles Morales as your Spider-Man. You chose not to. That's fine. Now don't give me that later on when you had that option from the jump.
Do you think, and I say this because, we are ingrained, we're going to watch comic book hero, superhero movie, no matter what, basically, because we love the stuff, we eat it up. For someone like, Lynn, like your girlfriend that got into MCU, do you think then phase 4, and it does seem like it's hinging on being significantly more complicated than the first 3 phases, it will lose their interest?
I'm terrified of that, actually, if I'm being fully honest, because Lynn, my girlfriend, didn't have familiarity with these characters to begin with, didn't have interest, got into it because I was into it. We like going to movies. Why not watch a Marvel movie? And she got into it. You know what I mean? Like it worked out in the end. I think Baby Groot had a lot to do with that. Gonna be honest. I mean, she has Baby Groot stuff everywhere.
Yeah, man.
Oh my god, it's what's getting her into Star Wars now with Baby Yoda.
Oh, Christ. Mandalorian was amazing, though.
I mean, we're halfway through now. I think we just finished episode 4. But I was excited because I thought we were going to be moving into sort of a fresh start. We're going to do new characters. We're going into new storylines. And I'm like, this is great, because now she's going to get to experience this kind of the way I did with Iron Man. You know what I mean? She's got some familiarity because a lot of characters were introduced in the previous movies. So she's not going in completely blind, but she's not going to have missed the whole train, right? Because one of the reasons she was hesitant to get into the Marvel movies with me in the first place was we're halfway through a 24 movie, 25 movie, whatever it was, series. 12 of those I haven't seen. Like, I can't just walk into a theater, watch the movie, and understand what's going on anymore. And that's a lot to buy into it to get into that franchise, right? And if they go this way with the multiverse, with alternate timelines and alternate characters or alternate versions of characters, I'm afraid it will become too dense. She would just check out. Like, I know that's what her attitude would be, because she's not trying. She doesn't have the familiarity with the comics and stuff to reference again. She doesn't understand, like, when we're watching, another example, Star Wars, stormtroopers walk out when they go to drop off Baby Yoda in like episode 2 or whatever. And I'm like, oh shit, like stormtrooper. Like, I know the story behind those characters. I know what their presence means. She has no idea, and you didn't need to know for the purposes of that. Like, the show makes very clear the Empire's bad. Stormtroopers work for the Empire, whatever.
But the Empire is involved, and by that alone, you're like, okay.
Right.
It's going to be deeper. Yeah.
But the show went to the trouble of explaining the Empire is bad, where my seeing the stormtroopers was good enough for me to realize, like, oh, this is not good. What's going on here? And I'm afraid that, like, that's what's going to happen with the cinematic universe in the following phases. It's going to get so dense and so complicated and so many things going on. If you don't have a sense of these things from before in your life, either through comics or through media consumption of however you got that information, you're just going to be kind of lost and disconnected.
It's a concern. And I mean, honestly, I think as these movies come out and these shows come out and are finished, it's going to be a talking point I think we come back to several times for the show and everything else. I know we're definitely going to dive into probably DC Universe and the Snyder Cut soon as well.
That is my hope. Because you think it's going to change people's opinions on the DCU, huh?
I don't think it's gonna. Well, we can save it for that episode. I don't want to spoil anything, but we definitely do have two conflicting. We have two. I think we have two different views of it, but I also like Batman versus Superman.
Yeah, we have the right view and the wrong view. I mean, that's just what it is.
but no, all right. As far as finishing up the show and everything else, I mean, what you talked about Mandalorian, bit of WandaVision. What else are you watching? What else are you reading right now?
Let's see. So I'm giving a rewatch of Stargate SG-1 classic sci-fi series. It's up on Netflix right now. I'm going to probably binge through that. We are working through Mandalorian together. I've got my girlfriend to that. And Baby Yoda is the cutest thing in the fucking world. So glad that they insisted on having a puppet and not going full CGI with the character, because it makes it absolutely more realistic and adorable. What would be my most anticipated movie? I'm going to be honest. I think it really is Multiverse of Madness, because by that point, I mean, it is Marvel again, so I guess it is what we've been talking about. But by that point, we should have a clear vision of where the cinematic universe is going, and I remain hopeful despite everything we've talked about. I remain hopeful.
No, I'm with you there. If we're gonna go MCU, I mean, I'm most intrigued about that one. But
I almost forgot. I need to give honorable mention to, gosh, let me get the name. It's an anime. It's like Bleach, but it's not Bleach. And by saying that, I think people who are watching it know what I'm talking about. Jujutsu Kaisen.
I've heard about it. I haven't watched
Super solid.
Yeah. Now I'm watching Attack on Titan final season right now, which is absolutely amazing. Bit of a slow start, but the last episode, The Assault, was everything I was hoping this season would be.
I don't know.
It's good. It's good. I'm curious to see where they go with it. But when that wraps up, I'm sure we'll have a whole episode dedicated to that, because you said you're going to binge it.
Absolutely.
Basically one sitting, which I can't fault you for. And then, I just beat Spider-Man on the PlayStation 4.
Congratulations.
Yeah. I don't know if I'm going to loved it. Absolutely understand why it was Game of the Year.
I'm bummed that it's not on PC.
Don't think I've actually ever cried at a game before, straight up. That's
Wait, you cried?
Dude, play it. The ending got me.
All right. So in the future, we know these are the bitch opinions coming from that side of the screen.
No, I was not ready for it. I don't want to spoil it for anybody, but I mean, it's been out for a bit, 2 years now, but it got me. And again, like, I love the character of Spider-Man and Peter Parker, and they do it complete justice. I'm excited to see what they do with the second one, and I'll probably pick up Miles Morales at some point as well, probably for the PS5 when the sequel comes out or God of War comes out. But I'm left now to where do I go through New Game Plus with that? I am playing Star Wars Squadrons as well. A lot of fun with that. But Horizon Zero Dawn and Fallen Order are the two that I'll probably tackle next as far as RPG. I'm not sure which one.
Zero Dawn, I've been very close to pulling the trigger on buying for a while now, so let me know how that goes for you.
Very good things. So we'll see. But I mean, that kind of wraps up for us, guys. Apologize to anybody that's in love with the MCU and, was sitting there just shaking their fist or cussing us out for, one, referring to Captain Marvel as Miss Marvel as often as we did, and basically just staying a hot dookie on MCU for most of the show. It's good stuff. It's, again, like, part of being a nerd is being critical of stuff like this. So, I mean, I think it's a big part of the MCU. We have so many fans that are happy and excited, and that progressive part of just surface level stuff. People don't really know all the source material, so it can be a bit of tough love sometimes. But next episode, we'll be talking about Zack Snyder and the Snyder Cut with Justice League. I mean, a 4-hour movie, which that's dedication to sit through that in one sitting for sure. We'll see what it is. Double D has different opinions than myself, but thank you guys for listening. You can follow us on Instagram and Twitter, Who Saved Over My Podcast. And again, thanks for listening, guys, and catch you next time.